Part 2.
Good morning. Board, this is Donna Daly. And let me just go over real quickly what we're going to do today. You've received the questionnaires, the 9 questions. There will be one question with an added part B that nobody had to see. We have 45 minutes to do this today. And, oh, am I missing? Yeah, why don't we go ahead and introduce the board, starting with Supervisor Chadwick.
Hi, thank you for coming. Supervisor Bobby Chadwick, District 3. Good morning.
Welcome, Supervisor Judy Morris, District 2, which is Weaverville.
Keith Groves, District 1.
John Finley, District 5, Southern Trinity.
Terry Mines, District 4.
Okay. Go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Pull your stuff out and everything.
Is it okay if I have some water?
That's perfect. And the mic, your mic's not quite as good as our mic, so if you could keep it close to you, that would be great.
Yeah.
All
I'm
right,
ready.
you ready?
Yes.
John, go ahead and lead us off.
Good morning, Ms. Daly. Or yes, we're still in morning. I get to ask the first question. Thank you for coming. Please explain to us your qualifications and the elements of your career that you believe are especially relevant to the position of District Attorney. Also, please share with us why you are interested in leaving your current position and joining Trinity County, your current volunteer position, I believe.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have the greatest depth and breadth of experience as a prosecutor, I believe, of all the candidates. I've been a prosecutor for over 32 years. I've worked for 6 different district attorneys and 4 at the Shasta County District Attorney's Office, and then 3 other district attorneys' offices, including Glenn County and Tehama County. I've also had the opportunity to observe the workings of 2 additional district attorneys' offices because I've been sent there on change of venue cases. One was Sonoma County and one was Sacramento County. Each office was different in size. When I started at the Shasta County District Attorney's Office, there were 7 attorneys. I watched it grow to about 25. Glenn County works with about 3 attorneys, and of course Sacramento, countless numbers of deputy district attorneys. I'm distinctly qualified on the perspective of seeing how other agencies and other district attorneys' offices handle the issues that face district attorneys' offices every day and law enforcement in general. From that perspective, I can take the best of what I've seen in each of these offices and apply them to the Trinity County District Attorney's Office. During my career as a prosecutor, I've tried through jury trial 3 death penalty cases and many murder cases. Those cases have included murder trials involving multiple defendants, murder for hire, murders for profit, murder of a police officer, and murder in the course of other violent felonies. One of the death penalty cases that I handled involved the very first time the introduction of DNA evidence in Shasta County, which then involved the testimony of multiple experts in order to have that testimony admitted. I've tried over 100 felony cases, including child molest and sexual assault cases, felony driving under the influence, domestic violence. I was the child molest sexual assault prosecutor for over 4.5 years at the Shasta County District Attorney's Office. I also handled the felony driving under the influence assignment and the homicide assignment. I've worked with the Shasta County Grand Jury on both civil and criminal investigations. I've also taught for the California District Attorneys Association, both in the training of brand new attorneys and in the training of more senior attorneys on the topic of how to handle a murder case and ask a jury to impose the death penalty. I've also taught as a visitor for Shasta College criminal justice classes on a variety of topics. When I worked as a senior prosecutor at the Shasta County Attorney's Office, I was responsible for handling the training and supervision of mid and new prosecutors. I trained and supervised attorneys in the Glenn County District Attorney's Office and delivered state bar accredited trainings on homicide in the Tehama County District Attorney's Office. I've worked closely with the California Attorney General's Office. Can everybody hear me? And I've developed contacts with senior prosecutors from the North State all the way down to San Diego. While at the Shasta District Attorney's Office, I served on the Child Death Review Team, the SAR Board, the Officer Involved Shooting Team. I also developed a policy manual for McGregor Scott, who was the district attorney at the time in Shasta County. I've coached mock trial teams in both Anderson and Shasta high schools. And for the years I wasn't coaching, I was helping with the setting it up and getting judges to judge it and having teams be organized so that they could participate. Presently, I volunteer at the Empower Tehama organization, which is a domestic violence assistance program, and I help domestic violence victims obtain restraining orders and basically coach them through that procedure. I also volunteer at the Cascade Theater in their box office. I retired from Shasta when my daughter started high school so that I could be there when she got home from school. She's now a college student at Humboldt State. I'm passionate about justice. I miss being a prosecutor. I would love to work as a prosecutor again. And during the 33 years that I've lived in Shasta County, I've traveled to Humboldt many times. My husband was born and raised in Humboldt County. So I've also hiked and explored the Trinity County Alps, houseboated on Trinity Lake. I've driven through and explored various areas of Trinity County and would like to spend more time here. So basically I left prosecution to be a stay-at-home mom, and then as I've been called back, those have been on contract assignments because I couldn't exceed the 960 hours.
Thank you.
Any follow-up questions? All right. The second one, which you answered in part, how many trials have you prosecuted and or defended?
I've only ever worked as a prosecutor, and it's probably over 200 cases. When I started out, I kept a trial book, but I lost track of how many trials I prosecuted. I started as a misdemeanor attorney and worked my way up to homicides. Aside from murders, I've prosecuted child molest, rape, residential burglary, robbery, forgery, assault with a deadly weapon, evading a police officer, willful and cruelty to a child, and domestic violence cases. Many of the people I prosecuted are still in prison and not eligible for parole.
Okay, any follow-up? Okay, Supervisor Morris?
How would you describe your relationship with each of the local law enforcement agencies, sheriff, police, CHP, probation, Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE?
I've actively managed my relationships with law enforcement in now 3 separate communities, and understand the stresses on each agency. and the need to communicate clearly and concisely and in a timely manner. The most factors I've found are to be accessible, straightforward, honest, and concise. I've stayed in touch with many of the police officers that I've worked with. As you can see from my references, many of those are police officers that I've worked with. When I've worked in the district attorney's office, I think it's extremely important to respond either by phone call or email within 24 hours. I had the opportunity to work, when I worked in Glenn County, many of the probation officers had never testified, and so I had the experience of training them on the ins and outs of testifying in probation violations. One of my very first trials was with Fish and Game, and I was very surprised that 30 years ago they had the DNA capability to match the DNA of an animal to a crime site. It was in Bernie, and they, much to my surprise, they brought the head of the animal in to look at the jury. So I believe any law enforcement officer that I've worked with would tell you that I'm very hardworking and competent.
Okay, any follow-ups? Supervisor Chadwick, would you still like to pass?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, Supervisor Mines?
What is your position on drug-related offenses and prosecution of such if appointed?
When I saw that question, that's a very broad question because there are different kinds of drugs that are merit prosecution. And they are difficult to group into one category. Minor offenses, such as simple possession of certain types of drugs, are sometimes best dealt with diversion and counseling if they're first-time offenses. It's really important to get a sense of the community and take the community's pulse on how they feel about drug offenses. When we're talking about illegal drugs such as methamphetamine and opiates, those are in a different category than marijuana. Manufacturers and dealers who are transporting large amounts of those illegal drugs, I feel should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I've read and reviewed your ordinances on marijuana cultivation and distribution. I was very impressed by the fact that you basically laid out the rules and what would happen if someone didn't. And you considered the fact that it shouldn't be nearby a school, it shouldn't be near a church. You even took into consideration the lighting and how that would affect neighbors, and the process of how to distribute it. You were very impressive in how you set forth the parameters and the limitations and what would happen if someone didn't abide by them.
Okay, any follow-ups?
Just wanted to say we didn't come up with the questions.
Okay.
Okay, number 5 is the one that we will have a part 2 that you have not yet to see. So, Sophie, please take number 5.
Thank you. Hello, Ms. Daly. The first part of the question is, please explain how you've created an optimal working relationship with elected officials, county executive officers, city managers, department heads, local and state law enforcement, other government agencies, and constituents with whom you interact. What have you done to establish credibility and facilitate communication with them?
When I worked with elected officials and county employees and law enforcement, once again, I've always been accessible, straightforward, and I get the job done. I respect opinions, and as I said before, I think one of the most critical things is to return phone calls and to be accessible within within a day. If there's an immediate issue, such as responding to a crime scene or something like that, I go immediately. With constituents, I spend time listening to the issue and trying to find out what the problem is. Sometimes it takes more than a minute to do that, and if a person is really upset, sometimes I'll ask them to write it down so that they can kind of focus on where their issues are. Sometimes a constituent is the mother of someone who's been arrested or the victim of a crime. So there's a wide variety in how to deal with those issues. But usually I'll ask them, if they're very, very upset, to write it down and then sit down and discuss with them what they want in terms of a resolution and how to resolve it. I think the most important thing in dealing with anybody is to be professional and be a good listener.
Okay, any other questions? All right, and part B?
Part 2 of the question is a little more specific. Have you had any interactions with the Board of Supervisors, County Council, CAO, or current or past judges? And please describe those relationships. And I believe it's intended to be specific to Trinity County.
I don't believe so.
All right. On to number 6, John.
Thank you. The victim of a very heinous crime wants to pursue charges that are only marginally supported by the evidence. Describe what actions you would take.
First, I would meet with law enforcement that is responsible for investigating the crime and see if they feel that there are additional things that they could do to perhaps work out the crime, work out what occurred, or if a crime actually occurred. If there's something else that can be followed up on, if there's another avenue to investigate. Then I would sit down with the victim and law enforcement to explore the issues. Sometimes a victim doesn't tell you something because they don't think it's very important, and but it could actually lead to additional evidence. I would examine the physical evidence with the investigator and the Department of Justice and see if there's something that's been overlooked. For example, when I just prosecuted the Quentin Bueller case, his DNA was found on the shirt that was used to strangle the young lady to death. And he insisted he had not committed the crime until the DNA was found. And then he insisted that he had given her a cigarette, and so there had been a transference of DNA. So when the investigator and I spoke to her family, her mother shared with us that she was very opposed to smoking. Her mother smoked, and she had had multiple conversations with her mother about she could chew gum to stop smoking, she could take medication, or she could eat a cold turkey. And so those kinds of things come out, and they actually are relevant to the case, and they can sometimes be critical in proving a point. If there was no other avenue to pursue, I would sit down with the victim and explain that the district attorney's burden is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and make sure that they understood that those are the ethical obligations that a district attorney has, and that a district attorney cannot file a case if they cannot prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, if they feel they cannot prove it beyond a reasonable doubt amongst a jury of their peers, of the citizens of the county. It's always important to be sensitive to the needs of the victim and to make sure that they're getting all of the assistance that they can be provided through state and county resources. But they would need to understand that sometimes it just can't be done.
Thank you.
Okay, follow up. All right, number 7. If If you were selected for this position, tell us how you will define your goals in your first 6 months as the Trinity County District Attorney.
The first 6 months, I believe, would involve basically becoming acclimated to the office, to the judiciary, and to the local law enforcement, how the system operates, and what actually is beneficial for the office and for the prosecution of crimes in Trinity County. In addition, I would build relationships with employees of all of the agencies and the judiciary in determining how things function. While learning these things, it would also be important to make sure that the cases are being still prosecuted fairly and being followed through on. If there's areas that need to perhaps be improved upon, or things that could be run a little more smoothly. It's also important to make sure that everyone knows that they're sharing in the workload and they're operating as a team. I would expect to work very hard in getting that information and that knowledge. And I think anyone would tell you that that's something I'm known for, is working extremely hard. Then I would want to evaluate whether there were things that could be run more efficiently or easily.
Any follow-ups? Supervisor Moore?
So all of our department heads, and I think this is what I heard you say, all of our department heads are working department heads, unlike maybe some of the larger counties. So I think I heard you say you would certainly take up caseloads.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Supervisor Morris, number 8.
Okay, please describe your experience managing a county department or major division of our organization and provide examples of your management style.
For a district attorney, I think management and leadership are two separate responsibilities. Obviously, there has to be leadership because there needs to be clear guidelines and expect those guidelines to be followed. This is necessary because within a district attorney's office, each person has ethical standards. In management, I already said this, it's important to listen and to assist. I manage several trial teams within the Shasta County District Attorney's Office. And in order to effectively have a team, it's important to take the time and to observe what each person is doing and whether they could improve what they're doing. But when I supervise attorneys, I believe it's important to watch them, but let them give you feedback first on what they think they could improve on, and then give them feedback once a trial is over or once a hearing is over. I also think that it's important to be able to focus on improvement at any time. I had an attorney that I trained explained to me that the reason that he liked to be on my team was that when he asked me a question, I would say, let's roll up our sleeves and figure out the answer, instead of go figure out the answer and come back and let me know what you find out. With management, each employee needs to know what's expected of them and what their responsibilities are. If there's an issue with guidelines or what's expected, it's important to listen to why they want to change those guidelines or what issues they're trying to resolve. I don't think it's necessary to always watch over employees every single minute, but it's important to have an open door policy so that if someone wants to vary from the guidelines, that it's discussed before that's done. When you're working as a team, it's important to work as a team and that everybody know the responsibilities that each other has. The most frequent problem that I've seen is that somebody feels they're carrying 60% of the caseload or 60% of the work and everybody else is just taking time off. So that often that occurs because people don't realize what everybody else does. And so intermittently, it's important to have meetings, especially if there's a situation of low morale or if people feel like they're being overloaded with work, so that everyone knows what they're working, what each other's work is, and how they're all working toward the same goal. In working at the Glenn County District Attorney's Office, after John Bassick, the Assistant District Attorney, left, there was only one full-time attorney and the District Attorney himself. There was a support staff of 3 women who could not have worked harder and been more supportive and were extremely dedicated to their job. And I made an effort, and it was important for them to know that how much they were appreciated, and that they worked well together as a team, and that was the thing that sent that office forward. It wasn't necessarily the attorneys appearing in court. It was the fact that we were prepared because of the work they had done. And that when everyone contributes to a good result, that's a team. My management style also includes being organized and prepared. In this recent prosecution of the Quentin Bueller case, because we were going to Sacramento County outside of Tehama, we had to be prepared. We had to anticipate and discuss as a team what the issues were that we were going to face. We had to go down to Sacramento and make sure that they had the ability to, if we wanted to have auditory or visual evidence, that they had the ability to have us have that function, or we had to bring the stuff with us. In addition, we had to be aware of the budgetary constraints, and that witnesses could come down in one day and return in the same day and not have to spend the night in a hotel. We had to anticipate whether Sacramento District Attorney's Office, which they did, gave us an office, gave us full access to research, and we could stay as late as we wanted and work on whatever issues arose. And it was decided how each person would handle. The officers handled some of the technical audio-visual things. They also were able to return home every Thursday and research or investigate any issues that came up during the course of the case. We had someone from victim witness there so that they could meet the witnesses, find a place for the witnesses to be comfortable. But basically it was sit down, get organized, and anticipate the issues. And that's something that I've always done as a manager, is to sit down, let's figure out where we've got to go and how we're going to get there.
Okay, Supervisor Mines, number 9, please.
Number 9, management and administration of the DA's office budget is a key responsibility of the DA. Describe your level of fiscal experience and knowledge, in particular preparing, managing, and administering a department budget. Describe your fiscal management philosophy during difficult budgetary cycles.
My level of fiscal experience is basically the knowledge I gained while working as a prosecutor. And it's basically an overall awareness of where the money can be spent, and in particular when it comes to the end of the fiscal year. The most important factors are that you don't spend what you don't have. You have to prioritize where the needs are and get input a lot of times from the employees on ways to save. In addition, one of the most important things is to allocate resources so that the community is safe. In Glenn County, the budget was very restricted, and it was necessary to make decisions regarding the cases that we could prosecute and the amount of time that could be spent on each case. We didn't have the resources to always attend drug court, so we appeared at the events that made an impact on the community, one being the driving under the influence sentencings that occurred at every high school every year. And It's also important to be aware of grants that can be obtained through the traffic safety units, through the state. There's going to be an issue with the most recent legislation that's been signed in regard to mental health. And that's going to be a big issue in determining how that money is allocated and how it's spent. Sometimes it's difficult in a small county to get the resources that are necessary to run that county. In addition, I have a fiscal management philosophy that sometimes people will tell you, particularly my daughter, is to recycle and reuse when possible. If you've printed something twice, turn it over, cut it into pieces of paper, and make scratch pads. I also believe agencies could save money by pooling resources, in particular in the areas of training. For example, if the CHP or the Sheriff's Office goes to a crisis intervention training, when they come back, it's important for them to sit down with the District Attorney's Office and share the training that they received, so that a prosecutor who's dealing with those issues can rely on that information. It would be important for a prosecutor to know how the agency's going to deal with it and what kind of training's been obtained. In addition, the California District Attorneys Association has multiple trainings online that can be shared, and those can be listened and watched to instead of going to an out-of-town training. What needs to be looked at overall is whether there are services that are being performed twice, multiple times in district attorney's offices. Police reports are copied over and over by the agency, sent to the district attorney's office, and then copied again and given to the defense when that's really not necessary. So there needs to be a tracking system in place. In addition, at the time an attorney reviews a case for issuing, although sometimes that's the time you might know the least about a case, it's important for the attorney to take the time and summarize the case so that the next person who picks up the file can review that without having to go into all of the details if they're just making an appearance on an arraignment or something like that. In addition, an offer can be made at the time of review. And the offer should be conveyed to the defense attorney at the time of arraignment. That way the next prosecutor who receives the case knows what bases have been covered. If the offer isn't accepted, then it can be changed. Prevents wrangling, attorney shopping, and a waste of resources. The district attorney's office can save money by keeping brief banks. That's typically when an attorney, a deputy researches an issue, they highlight the issue and put it into a bank, either online or in a file cabinet. And the next attorney who has to research that issue can see whether that work's been done and not have to spend the time re-researching the issue. Often when I've worked in some of the smaller offices, the attorneys will keep their own brief banks but not share them with others. That's a waste of resources. Basically, it's necessary to make decisions based upon where the greatest impact is going to be for the community and with law enforcement, and to prioritize and allocate the resources accordingly.
Okay, follow up. All right, so this completes your review. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us relative to the position or your experience?
I believe I'd be your best selection for district attorney. It's necessary for a district attorney to have a lot of experience and be familiar with the system of justice, understand the role that a district attorney plays, and that the law applies in achieving justice. I have that knowledge and experience. I have more experience with high-profile cases than as a prosecutor than any other candidates. I've had the responsibility of management, both small and large teams, including personnel, budget, and training of prosecutors. I've handled the many facets of being a prosecutor, from contact with the public, evaluating cases for prosecution, dealing with the grand jury, dealing with victims and their families. I worked for some very cash-poor offices and understand budgetary restraints. While I'm not the candidate who's probably spent the most time in Trinity County, it is a county I'm familiar with due to my travels across 299 and spending a lot of vacation time here. As I've told you, my husband's family lives in Humboldt County, and living in Shasta County for 33 years. We've traveled 299 and seen the stop signs go in and the stop lights. And it's been interesting to watch Trinity County develop. As you can see from my letters of recommendation and my references, and the people that I've worked with, I work very hard. I've got relationships with law enforcement, deputy attorney generals, and many prosecutors. They respect me and my approach to justice. I have the depth of experience and a tremendous passion for fairness and public safety. I've applied for this position because a district attorney must be able to inspire justice and fairness in the community. And I think maybe I retired a little early because I do miss being a prosecutor and I miss the requirements of the job. I have the experience and the perspective and the skills, and I'd be honored to accept the appointment.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have a question, if you've had a interaction with different county council, just yes or no, is that, may I ask that?
We did ask that already.
So that's specific to a specific county, specific person. Tehama County, have you worked with Arthur Wiley?
No, I worked with one of his deputies because we had to, and she has since left.
Okay,
but
thank you.
We had to travel down to Sacramento on a couple of issues. I've worked with actually Michelle Nassis.
It was just specific to Mr. Wiley. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And we will, this afternoon, we will have discussions later today on where we're going to move and move forward. And so as soon as Human Resources hears something, they will contact you.
Well, I had planned to come back. I know, I think you have an interview at 2:15.
Okay. Yes.
And then you're going to go into closed session, is that correct?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We are going to do some public comment on the first two candidates, if the public has anything they would like to add today, and we will also have public comment after the last two. Any public comment? Okay. Sure. Yeah, where should she stand, guys? Yeah, go ahead and just, you get to sit. Today is a special day.
I need to sit, okay.
And state your name for the record, please.
I'm Mary Lynn Rounds, and this has been a very interesting morning. I've not been familiar with the district attorney appointees and how it's done and the interviews and so forth, and I appreciate being here. The one thing in listening, I was not able to hear about a third of the answers of the first interviewee because the voice kind of trailed away toward the end. But what I did hear was kind of the suggestion that for expediency, perhaps it's a good idea to pick somebody who's already within the county. And that's a good point, because somebody could get up and running right away. But I think with the importance of the issues at this time in our county, the drug issues, the prescription drugs, the illegal drugs, the marijuana, the abuse, all the sorts of things that are going on, that I would be more interested in making sure that I hired the person who has the most expertise. It might take a little longer to get up and running, but on the other hand, it sounds like it's about a 2.5 year long appointment till 4 years, but finishing this term. That's a long time, and I would, in my opinion, it seems like it would be advisable to pick the person with the most experience because of the length of the time of the appointment. Thank you.
Hey, Grace from Lewiston. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And this is a little bit general for the other people, but my suggestion, especially since our troubles in the past, would be to pick somebody not with ties in this county, qualified but not ties in this county, because there's been so many conflicts, and there just is. When you're here for a long time, you know people, you just do. And so if you have qualified people, I would like to see them given weight for being outside of this county. Also, I'm curious why the letters of recommendation are redacted, because the person who gives the recommendation is important, and you've taken away who that is and where the county is, and I'm not really sure why. It's a letter of recommendation. It's important who it comes from and where it came from. So it would have been nice that that information had been given to the public. Thank you.
Anybody else? With that,
My name is Prema Swearingen. I feel also like the previous speaker that it's important to have someone who's very experienced, and just knowing the county I don't feel is enough, so I would really like to encourage the board to consider as many outside the county applicants as there are.
thank you. All right, anybody else? With that, our next interview is at 1:30. We'll convene at 1:25. And we will be locking up the room here, so.
And part 2.